from Bill Ohms. This is the second in a two-part series. In the first, we made a cube box with a tight-fitting lid, and in the second video, we're going to ornament the sides and top and bottom with an ornamental lathe. Now that we've completed making our box, time's come to decorate it. You can decorate it any number of ways. I'm going to use an ornamental lathe. First thing I want to do is secure the top and bottom in proper orientation. Earlier I made an alignment mark that helps to locate the proper orientation, especially on these hard, dense woods like African blackwood. You can see I made a little mark there. That will hold the top and the bottom in place. We're going to do the sides first and then the top and bottom. I'm going to mount the work in a regular 4-jaw chuck, but only the top and bottom jaw will be gripping it. At this point the box is taller. The dimensions I gave you to start working with it should end up with this being about 2 1/8 to 2 1/4 inches high. So we can mount it in the chuck, and just the top and bottom will hold it. We'll get marks from the jaws on the top and bottom, but we'll finish the top and bottom later, and that will take care of those. We'll want to make sure that the box is centered front to back so that our pattern will end up being centered. And we'll also want to make sure that the box is level when we start our patterning, so that the patterns wrapping around the edges will meet. Now a brief introduction to ornamental lathes, or rose engine lathes as sometimes they're called. The principle of operation is that you have a high-speed cutter. You can see the little brass wheel with a cutter mounted in it that rotates. It's driven with an overhead motor with a drive belt. As that high-speed cutter, almost like a router, cuts the wood, the work slowly turns. In a traditional rose engine, the head moves back and forth while the cutter is operating. In my case, I've got a rotating a cutter mounted on a stage, an XY stage that's driven with stepper motors from a computer. Gives the same kind of patterns as a traditional rose engine. So even though I'm using a computer controlled ornamental lathe, you could do all the same things with a traditional rose engine machine. Here I'll show you the overhead motor. That's what powers the cutter with a flexible belt, sort of like an old dentist drill. The first thing we'll want to do is make sure that the very center of the surface is perfectly flat and we get any waxy residue off, get it nice and smooth. But we don't have to do it for the whole side of the box because there's only a little area in the very center that will be exposed uncut. Everything else will eventually get cut down. So I'm just going to trim off a little area about 7/10 of an inch diameter around the middle there. You can see that ring in the very center of the box where the surface is very flat and level. Okay, we're going to start in the middle making our first cut. I will need a pumping action. If your rose engine has pumping action, that's what you'll need to use on this. I'm using a sine rosette, a sine wave pattern. It has 8 repeats going around the circle, and the peak-to-peak amplitude is 50/1000ths of an inch. We'll want to position the cutter so that we just barely have the cuts meeting in the center. And I'll cut a little bit, then I'll stop and show you what this looks like. Here's what it looks like after the first cut. We've just made a single sine 8 pumping action cut with everything just touching in the middle. All of our cuts are going to use the sine 8 rosette pumping action, same depth. This next cut I'm going to move over 1/10 of an inch away from the center and change the phase by 90 degrees. When I talk about 90 degrees, I mean 90 degrees of the repeat pattern. That's 1/4 of the repeat pattern. And I'll cut a little bit and stop and show you what that looks like then. hoping you can see the second cut there, and it's slightly rotated around 1/4 of the repeat, or 90 degrees. Okay, now I'm going to be cutting 3 more cuts here and let you see how the pattern progresses. Each time I move the cutter out from the center another 1/10 of an inch and do another 90-degree phase shift. We'll stop after 3 more cuts and see what it looks like. Okay, so here's our pattern after 5 cuts. You can see that spiral starting to form, and now I'll go ahead and finish all the other cuts. When you're going out and finishing the cuts, remember to keep cutting until you get the very corners. Most of the time you'll be cutting air, but it's important to follow the pattern through and cut those last little bits on the corner and follow the pattern all the way through. So here we have our completed pattern on one side. And now we can turn the piece around. We're going to do the opposite side. Once again, making sure that the distance from the front to back is the same, so it's centered. Our pattern will be centered on the jaws of the chuck. Now that we have 2 sides decorated, we'll put some tape on in the opposite direction and then cut the other tape off, and then we'll be ready to do the other 2 sides in exactly the same way. And here's the box with all 4 sides turned. Now we can unmount it and take the tape off. Next we'll pattern the lid. If you wanted to do any decoration inside, this would be a good time to do it. Then we're going to mount it on an expansion chuck and turn off the tenon and then decorate the top pattern. So there's our patterned lid, and now we'll take that off and do the base. As with the lid, we'll use an expansion chuck, different size of course, to fit the base. And we're going to take off about 20/1000 of an inch just to get the jaw marks off the bottom and clean that up, and then we'll put a simpler pattern on the bottom. After trimming off 20/1000 of an inch, we'll want to sand the bottom, and we'll go all the way to 1200 grit. We're not going to pattern the entire bottom, just a very simple pattern. Then after sanding the bottom, we'll want to cut a simple pattern on the base, nothing too fancy, just something to finish it off. So here we have just a simple flower pattern we put on the bottom, and now we can take it off and sign it. For finishing, I like to use oil finish. Wipe it on and rub it off. As you're rubbing it off, make sure you get things out of all the little cracks and crevices. Sometimes you have to wrap a towel around your fingernail or something to get it all out. And the final step is to put some wax on and buff it. And here's our finished box. Thank you for watching these videos on making a cube box.